We're live. Hi, world.
Hey,
This is
startled me.
that's the goal. I want to
Okay,
startle everyone.
mission accomplished.
So we're just here to do Q&A.
Yeah.
Oh God, I'm seeing myself. I was seeing myself in a time shifted way, and it was very frightening. But I think I got rid of it. All right, let's get started. We're just going to tackle questions that were in a Facebook poll. I'm not even going to bother to link it. If you want to, you can put things in chat. I do have it on my screen. And with that, we'll start with our most voted on question. What is your development workflow? Fred, take it away.
Yeah, so I'll talk quickly about mine, and David, I'd love to hear. Obviously, you talk about yours as well. So for me, I use Sublime Text as my text editor. I use I've just started using a local development software called Laragon. It was actually recommended by somebody in the WPShout group, Facebook group, and it's really, really nice. It like uses so much less memory than MAMP, which so I've got a Windows machine, and I was using MAMP, and it was, my machine has some sort of, it's low quality in some way, and like I could use MAMP, but it would slowly crash my computer, and the only way to like set it right was to restart it. So I'm trying Laragon. It feels really, really good so far. But so if I'm building out a site, I'll build it out locally typically, and then I'll move it into, so the root domain in our hosting is like we have like a dev kind of subdomain, dev dot the root domain in our agency site hosting. So I'll put up a site at like dev.pressuppinc.com/ and then guy, like client name. And then, so I'll usually build it out locally, and then at some point I'll put it on test hosting. And then from there on, typically I will actually just develop remotely. And I use FileZilla for FTP. So a lot of the time I'm cowboy coding. So like, let me just quickly share my screen here. So like, I've got FileZilla open. So like, if I was gonna change something, let's say on the WPShout side, I would literally cowboy code it, and I'll just show you what that would look like. So yeah, this is WPShout. Let's just change the version on one of the plugins we wrote. How about? So, oh, and you guys might like this. Again, cowboy coding is not like great. Like it's not what you should do for live sites that have a ton of traffic and that kind of thing. But
Fortunately, your site is not popular.
no, our site is popular, but I know what I'm doing, so I know I'm not going to take it down for more than a few seconds at a time. So if you've never done this in FileZilla, there's this view edit option, and it lets you basically kind of live edit stuff. So if I want to give this a version, I'll just sort of make my changes, save, go back to FileZilla, and if it asks if I really want to make the change, I'll say yes. So that's how I cowboy code, and then how I do like local development, non-cowboy stuff is I'm using this local server called Laragon, and you basically just you create, this is very much like a FileZilla window. You can sort of see the entire directory structure. And if I want to change the name of the theme that's running from 2017 to, oh, let's change it to 2017 hello. You just do that, hit save, and that makes the change right there. So yeah, so that's how I do local hosting, local development, and that's also how I, in practice, cowboy code a lot of the stuff that I do both on WPShout and for clients. You can see that the change made locally here in this local host environment. Yeah, so that's me. What about you, David?
Cow person.
Sorry, cow person. Person of cow.
I'm somewhat teasing. I think similar to you, actually, I end up cowboy coding a lot of stuff. Cowboy being, for people who aren't familiar, the derisive term for someone who does it live in a way that could accidentally take down a website. And it works so well on WordPress. I've never like gotten out of the habit of kind of just FTPing up the files. I am not going to share my screen because it's a mess and too large. But I typically use on a Mac, I use an app called Transmit, which is basically a nice, much nicer looking version of FileZilla and costs money. But otherwise works very similarly. If you double click a file, you get a local preview copy where you can just like save it and it re-uploads for you in the background. When I do that stuff, I'm always using Sublime Text. I've not tried in earnest Visual Studio Code, but I've thought about it. And for like actual project work where I'm going to like develop multiple plugins or even just like a single plugin where I don't want to just like do it live, so to speak, I definitely will use PHP Storm. I really like PHP Storm. It's a much more expensive that it costs any money at all version of a text editor. It's what people call an IDE, where you actually have the ability to quickly jump around to the, go to the declaration of your function or go to find all the usages of your function within the project. It has basic refactorings built in, so you can like pull something out into a function or inline what was previously a function just by clicking a couple buttons. And that's really its big advantage over something like Visual Studio Code or Sublime Text, is that an IDE will have some more knowledge in general. The term means it has more knowledge of your language and your environment than something like Sublime Text, a simple, like very fancy text editor, can do. I think you can add some of those features to Sublime Text via like plugins. You can certainly add basic linting and reformatting that PHP Storm has to Sublime Text. I personally have set those up once or twice and been annoyed by them and left them set up or didn't, and rarely use much more than like very basic Sublime Text. But that's really the primary thing I do. If I'm actually going to, like, again, develop for real, I'm using Git and those sorts of things. I'm not sure at what level to define development workflow for the sake of this question. I will often use MAMP Pro on a Mac, and then I sometimes will actually use, I've played with Docker a tiny bit. I use Vagrant still most of the time because I set that up 3 years ago and it still works okay because I bought powerful computers to deal with it. If I had a less powerful computer, Docker-based solutions replacing Vagrant would be higher on my mind than it is. I think that's it. Have any questions about any of that?
Well, you touched briefly on Git, and it might be nice to say a little bit about version control and when it's important, what it can and can't do in WordPress. Just the the elevator version of that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so version control in general is a good idea. Cowboy coding, which we've said a lot, is kind of in opposition to the conceptual idea of version control, which is one of the many downsides of doing it sloppily and live, which is that, like, with version control, you typically maintain the local copy and you write your changes, ideally as small as possible, but that's a whole philosophical debate about that topic. So I think in general, the idea is that you want to save the version of the file that you had last April, so that when the client is like, oh, we used to have this screen in this project, I know I got rid of it, but can I have it back again? You want to actually have a history of the project. And that's what version control in general is for. And Git is just the most popular version of version control. Alternatives include Subversion and Mercurial, neither of which is at all close to popularity. You've heard of GitHub and GitLab and what have you, and those are all just like things built on top of the underlying Git software.
So let's segue into local development, which we both touched on briefly, but it was kind of the second most upvoted question in the poll. What do we use for local development? So I'll give a little bit of a history lesson through my just sort of like random tumble down the tree that is local development, hitting all the branches. And then maybe, David, you can kind of reiterate what you said about Docker and Vagrant and MAMP Pro and how those differ. So I use a PC, and and I'm dimly aware of a bunch of different local development options, but I haven't ever spent time optimizing. Like, okay, this is the very, very best one, and this one's awesome, and it's got all these extra features which I need. Because most of the websites I'm building are WordPress sites that are kind of like, they're not highly specialized in terms of like the server environment that they need to be in. And if they were, it would actually be a problem. So I started using WAMP, Windows, Apache, MySQL, PHP, which is just like a software package. WAMP, W-A-M-P, is a software package that you can find online, readily download it for any Windows machine. And I liked and used that for a long time on my old laptop. It was a little bit slow, a little bit clunky, but it really did everything I needed for local development. On the current machine I'm on, I started with MAMP because somebody told me, which I hadn't realized, that even though the M in MAMP, the first M, stands for Macintosh, they actually created a MAMP for Windows. So I started using that, and it's a little more graceful than WAMP in my experience, but somehow I don't know, it was creating really serious performance issues on my computer, so I dropped it about a week and a half ago in favor of this thing called Laragon, Laragon, which is just kind of a new local server, like local development software that that advertises itself as being kind of relatively simple and lightweight. And I'm just starting to get into that. The setup was dead simple. So far, it does everything I'm wanting. I am noticing it feels, if I just installed a test WordPress site on it, and that process felt a little bit slow in places I wasn't expecting. So I'm going to have to do a little bit more exploration before I can tell you guys that, yes, I'm like a Laragon guy for life. But basically, MAMP, WAMP, like pretty much anything you find, in my opinion, should be good for basic WordPress development. And really the questions are, how easy is it to set up? And how much of your computer resources does it occupy? It shouldn't be something like, oh, well, like this isn't a Vagrant style environment where you can easily roll forward and back PHP versions with the click of a button. I don't think that stuff's important, for at least certainly for the kind of work I do. So that's my 2 cents. Go for whatever works and whatever's easy to use, and whatever doesn't force you to restart your computer after you're done using it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point about doesn't matter for the kind of work you do is correct. Like if I were suddenly to be the web developer for the New York Times, like orchestrating infrastructure that supported the website being as fast as possible would be a lot more important than it is for, WordPress sites. Even the size of WPShout, we get like something like 70,000 visits a month, but that doesn't actually end up mattering, that we like know exactly what metal we put on our server in the way that it would if there were like 100,000 visits a day. Yeah, so to recount my similar story, when I first got a Mac, which is the first thing I'll count, I used to use WAMP like 10 years ago when I was on Windows. When I first got a Mac, I just like installed Apache and MySQL and piped them together from the underlying operating system. And that actually sucked a lot because it required more knowledge of orchestrating a Mac and keeping it up to date when a new version of the operating system came out. So I abandoned that mostly in favor of MAMP and have been mostly using MAMP since then. I fiddled a lot with various variants on the theme of Laravel hosted projects, which I think is what Laragon is named for, whether or not it realizes it or markets itself that way. So because I used the Laravel PHP framework for some projects, I've used both Laravel Homestead, which is this Vagrant-based thing. Vagrant, for those who don't know, is a way to orchestrate virtual machines like VirtualBox or Parallels or that kind of thing via a more programmatic interface. So Vagrant comes up a lot on the topic of local development. VVV is something of a brand in the WordPress ecosystem, and it's just like, it stands for Varying Vagrant Variants or something. I don't even remember what the 3 Vs are.
It's actually Varying Vagrants, I'm pretty sure, and I have no idea what that means. Of course, I don't know what that means. It's like PHP, where PHP, it's a recursive acronym. It's just some sort of, I'm pretty sure it's some sort of nerd in joke.
Yeah, but anyway, I think there's also a VV project, which is either before or after the VVV project, and they relate in some way. I've fiddled with them enough to like be like, oh, I got this running, and then was like, this is too complex for me to care about maintaining it well. So I always come back to MAMP as like comforting and home-like for the things I need, which is like the ability to create a 1 to 200 line plugin and verify that it complies with WordPress. And I never need to like orchestrate complicated interactions between my plugins and other plugins or anything like that that would require like actively going significantly further down that road. I've also fiddled with like Docker-based projects. The nice thing about Docker-based projects as opposed to Vagrant-based projects, which is kind of the big distinction of like more modern things than WAMP and MAMP and SHAMP and all of AMP, I think is one, AAMP. Vagrant is like orchestrating a full machine booting up on your own computer. So you have to wait for like that boot up process in the virtualization of all the resources. Docker is thinner in the way that it virtualizes things. So it protects you from it. And like you get some of the values of a Vagrant-based system, but you don't have to wait as long or consume as many resources. So Docker-based things are the thing I'm most interested in, like finding if one is good yet. But I have yet to find one that's very good. I have also played with Laravel Valet, which is very close to the thing I used to do way back in the day, where you just like orchestrate Apache and MySQL and PHP together on your Mac-based operating system. It's a little nicer than that because they've done some thinking about how to set that up better than I used to. But if you're on a Mac, I definitely would check that out. People love it because it's so lightweight, because it's not spinning up either a Vagrant box or a Docker thing at all. You're just like doing it on the machine, but the risk is that compatibility between like operating system versions and stuff goes away. All right, I think we've covered that unless you've got thoughts or questions, Fred.
That should do it. And I really love the next question. So
yeah, let's get to it.
Let's get to it.
How do you extend a plugin so that it does not, so that it is not reverted when it's updated?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question, and maybe we should kind of explain the question before we get into some of the answers, because the answer actually is not really, there is no simple answer that's to that question. So just like themes, plugins, the process of updating them is essentially there's one block of code and the update just drops its entire code on the existing block of code and destroys it. So you can't
updated with the WordPress dashboard.
Yeah. So like, let's say, so that the asker's question is about like, let's say I needed to change something with, my social button, like widget plugin. I need to change something about that. Well, geez, if I write my code changes into the plugin and then the site owner comes in and just clicks update on that plugin, the next time an update becomes available from the WordPress plugin repo, won't I lose my changes? And the answer to that is yes. And the other thing that makes this question really interesting is, okay, so like with themes, the answer to that is child themes. Like that's the whole reason child themes exist, is so that you can update an underlying theme while just sort of having a place where only your modifications for it live, which is the child theme. There is no such thing as a child plugin. So it's a really, really good question. And the way it pans out in practice is actually pretty complex. So David, I'm not sure if you want to say anything either to start answering the question or to set it up, but I have some ways that my mind goes with respect to that question.
Sure. I don't have a ton to say without starting to answer. I think the appealing thing is like I understand enough code and I see that this PHP thing is like putting together this HTML that I want to modify the markup of. And without understanding a ton about how PHP functions, I can actually go into the file of the plugin that I found via my text search or whatever and just like change the markup right there. So I think that's why people find themselves in this situation, is that like you don't have to understand a ton to be able to like make the markup change inside of many plugins in the WordPress ecosystem. But in order to make them permanent, you do have to start to understand a little more complexity. And I'll let you start to explain that complexity, Fred.
Yeah. So if you want, so here are the few things that I would say about how to change the way a plugin functions. So the best case scenario is that the plugin registers hooks, and that the hooks that it's registering are extensive enough that whatever it is you need to change about the plugin, there's a hook that you can hook onto. And if you don't know what WordPress hooks are, just Google like WPShout hooks, and you'll find our article on the topic. It's basically, there are these these things that run at defined points of WordPress's processing that you can kind of insert your own code into. And so WordPress is kind of like a factory with the web page you're generating moving along an assembly line, and hooks are like you get to come in at special parts on that assembly line and paint the car green instead of red, let's say. So the ideal thing is that your plugin has been conscientiously written, and you can just hook into whatever behavior it is you're trying to change and put your own code, like hook your own code in. So let's say you're trying to filter the word cart to, you know, shopping basket or something like that, and you're trying to modify WooCommerce. You can do that with WooCommerce is extensively sort of has an extensive set of hooks, and wherever you find the hook that lets you change, the filter hook that lets you change the word cart to something else, you would just write your own like miniature little plugin that hooks into that filter hook that WooCommerce registers and change it there. So you basically write a second plugin to modify the first without ever touching the source code in the first plugin. So that's the best case scenario. I don't know if I should continue. David, do you want to say a bit more about kind of that general discussion?
I think the few things that are occurring to me to say is, one is we cannot explain this well enough live and without code. So definitely like seek out the article. I did paste it in the chat, our like foundational hooks article that should like flesh out some of what Fred was just saying. The second thing is that you also, though we don't recommend it, and it starts to lead to the next topic, so I won't go too deep into it, you can put this code that needs to modify a plugin inside of a functions.php file in a WordPress theme. We'll get into in a minute why that's not typically recommended by us, but you can do that as well. Conceptually, the thing works the same, which is that you're putting your code in a place you control. So in your child theme or in your own like totally custom theme, you're putting the code there, and then you're using what are called action or filters that the plugin or WordPress itself declares to say, when this happens, you know, WooCommerce says like I finished showing the product content or whatever, then you say, oh, and also put in this stuff. And you can, it gets kind of complicated to like unhook someone else's hook and then hook on something else that includes your different markup. But that you actually, in order to really preserve your changes over time, you have to kind of come to terms with that complexity, because there's not a way around it if so long as WooCommerce is allowed to update, for example.
Yeah. So let's just talk about the situation where a plugin is not written, like let's say a plugin was just written by a random person. It's not like commercially released. And so it's just a block of code. There's no hooks in it.
Like your client's former developer wrote it.
Yeah, exactly. So like let's say your client has a former developer who wrote a plugin. Well, that's actually kind of a bad example, because then you don't get into updates because it's not released on the plugin.
Sure.
Repo. So let's just think there are many plugins that, especially like smaller plugins, that do not actually use WordPress's hook system, or maybe they do, but they don't use it where you need. Like you're trying to hook into something and there's just not a hook nearby, basically.
Right.
So you have go ahead, David.
Real quick, you mean that because a plugin has to use the hook system, you mean that they aren't providing their own hooks?
Yeah, they're not registering their own hooks that you can use to modify the output of the plugin. So you have a couple options. Sometimes you actually will need to directly modify the plugin itself, and if you do that, the best way that I've found is you are basically creating your own plugin at that point. Like the plugin is no longer the plugin that you started with that is in the WordPress theme repository. It started that way, but now it's essentially your kind of like weird side variant of it. So the thing you do is you rename the plugin. So like our web agency is called PressUp. So like let's say it was like Easy Social Share Buttons or something. You would rename the plugin to Easy Social Share Buttons PressUp Modifications. You would also change the folder that it lives in from Easy Social Share Buttons to Easy Social Share Buttons PressUp Modifications. And you might want to change the version number as well, from like 1.5.2 to like 9.9.9, something like that. What you're basically doing is you're taking it completely out of the WordPress plugin repository. You're telling WordPress, this isn't the plugin you used to think it was. Don't look for updates to it. So that's a way to create a stable version of a plugin that has your modifications in it that won't be susceptible to your client just going in and like bulk updating everything and destroying changes you made. There is a serious downside to that, which is that you now no longer get updates to that plugin. So like, let's say it's an extension for Gravity Forms or WooCommerce or something like that. like it's now outside of the update flow, and as those plugins continue to roll forward, your plugin just stays where it is. So it really is case by case how big a problem that will be. Like if it's a social share button plugin, like realistically, you know, social share button plugins from 10 years ago probably still work. If it's something that hooks in a very intricate way into something like Gutenberg or WooCommerce or something like that, and you pull it out of that update flow, you might have problems within as little as 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years kind of thing. But that is one way forward if you absolutely do need to change the plugin code. Yeah.
Yeah. And the way I think about that, though, is that you have just taken responsibility for everything about that plugin. So you either need to be a very good developer and understand what it's doing, or you just have to like take a risk. You're gambling that like there won't be a security issue with version 10.2.1 of this plugin that I didn't correct in my version that now makes my client susceptible to it or something like that. So that is a pretty substantial risk of that thing, and I just want to highlight it. It is sometimes the best of the bad options you have, especially if you know the old developer who maintains it on the plugin repository doesn't answer your like, hey, could I have a hook here, kind of request, which is I think maybe what you were about to get to, Fred, which is another option is to just approach the developer of that plugin and say, hey, I was trying to do this, I couldn't do it. If you add this to it, I can then do it. Often people will be like, oh yeah, I didn't know that. That sounds great. You know, it's going in right now. That'll often happen if you know exactly what you need and can like communicate that clearly to the developer of the original plugin.
Yeah, I really love that idea, David. And I wasn't, that wouldn't have occurred to me, but that's really good advice. And you know, that one of the merits of that is that you're actually sort of giving back code to the WordPress community, which is a really wonderful thing to do anytime you can find the time to do it. The only other thing I'll mention on this question is basically one of the sort of Jedi kind of tricks that you learn slowly as a WordPress developer is basically how to modify the functioning of plugins without changing the plugins themselves. So like early on, it feels very monolithic, like this plugin's doing the wrong thing and I want it to do the right thing. But in a lot of cases, there's just a lot of ways to modify behavior while holding a block of code as a constant that you can't change. So if it's something on the front end, you might be able to do it with creative CSS rules. If the plugin is registered in an object-oriented way, meaning it's a bunch of classes, I ended up doing this about a month ago. This former developer for a client of mine had registered like a whole class that creates this whole output and wraps it in a shortcode, and it basically ends up creating like a sort of a visual element on the page. And he needed it to function differently. He needed it to pull different kinds of data. So what I did is I just sort of copied his entire class into a plugin that I wrote myself. Obviously renamed the class to something, that reflects the changes that I was going to make, and then changed the name of the shortcode that it registered. So basically, I took his entire plugin as the basis for a plugin that I wrote without ever needing to sort of change his code. So yeah, you kind of learn Jedi mind tricks around not actually messing with plugins. And so probably I would say 90% of the times where you think, okay, well, I should really change the plugin to do this, there's ways around it. And the other 10% of the time, you just have to change the plugin and just pull it out of the repo and kind of live with the consequences.
Cool. Yeah, I think that covers that as well as we reasonably can without getting into
yeah, with no specifics, just words, no code.
There's a lot of understanding of PHP that like you will possibly hard win on that battle of moving from like I can change the markup into a plugin into like I understand enough code to request the right hook from the plugin developer for me to make the change that I want to make. There is a lot of like conceptual stuff that's kind of difficult there, but I think that is basically what you need to do is understand hooks, and ideally you'll be on the happy path of just the hooks are there, the filters, the actions, or you can do the like take it over thing we talked about. Next is not actually formulated as a question, but I think we know what it's talking about, is the words theme creep. And I'll let you say something, Fred, so I just don't talk for 5 minutes.
Totally. So theme creep refers to the general problem that themes be creeping. They're basically taking they're taking responsibility for things that a WordPress theme should not be responsible for. And so theme creep is basically kind of a philosophical statement about what the different pieces of WordPress are for. And it says that a theme is for presentation. It's for how your website looks. So that's distinct from like the data or the actual content of your site. So that would be your posts, your users, your pages, your comments. If it's a WooCommerce site, your sales, your orders, your products, right? All these things are data. They live in the database, and they also might live in your file system, for example, your media library, right? And the kind of notion of WordPress is that you should be able to sort of reskin your website by changing the theme while keeping all of your data the same. And so theme creep refers to kind of anything a theme does that starts to get it into the business of storing non-presentational data, like post types or users or product variations, or kind of anything where if you tear the theme out and replace it with a different one, you lose stuff. You lose your posts, you lose your users, you lose SEO optimization, you lose meta descriptions for your posts, those kind of things. So that's basically the general definition of theme creep. Again, the thing in the poll was just theme creep with both words capitalized. So I think we have license just to basically talk about what it is and what to do about it. But yeah, David, what would you tack onto that?
Yeah, I mean, so I mentioned that like when you want to modify a plugin and you start to use actions and filter hooks in WordPress, you actually can do that in your functions.php file. And I think that is a great example of a place where there are times when this conceptually makes sense as something that you would keep to your theme because it affects, say, the output of your social share buttons. And there are times when this totally shouldn't be something that you would ever do in your theme because you're like making WooCommerce include discounts in certain conditions of a shopping cart. That's a very stark distinction in my mind, where one is about how the e-commerce site functions and the other is about like how it looks. And I think that is one of the distinctions I would make. Many people will refer to your functions.php as like your theme's plugin, which is true. But you want to keep that plugin narrowly confined to the things that actually affect the visual presentation of a site and not the functionality of a website, because you don't want to, as a developer, personally, I never want to have a client switch off a theme because they got tired of the way it looked and then be like, oh, like now I can't do the bulk discounts that were a core part of my business. So that's why as a developer, you want to like make a plugin that's like, this is, I don't know, the Grain Business Association plugin where like when you buy 8 tons, suddenly the price decreases in half or something like that. Like that is a thing that is core to the functionality of like the Grain, whatever I said, site. And so shouldn't be in its theme because it's so important to the way they do business.
Yeah, so that's basically theme creep. That's the reason not to get into it. And maybe we can kind of extend this discussion a little bit by looking at what are the practical ways in which theme creep crops up and what you can do about them. So when I think theme creep, I think theme forest themes that bundle with Visual Composer, which is also called WP Bakery Page Builder. Those themes, almost all of them, are designed to help people with little to no technical knowledge get a website up. And what they sell you on is the theme demo. And then you just get this bundle of everything. That's like the theme that is not well distinguished from the site. It's like you think you're buying a site and the form that you buy that in is like a $50, $60, $70, $40, $90 theme. So what happens with those themes is, first of all, like the WP Bakery Page Builder is horrible. Like it's horrible in a million ways. And I've actually written probably 5,000 words about it. So if you just look on WPShout, just like look for a WPShout Page Builder, or it's on the homepage, you'll find it. It's one of the sort of featured articles on the homepage. You'll find kind of my issues with WP Bakery. But one of my major issues with it is that if you turn it off, it breaks everything. It's shortcode based. It just vomits a bunch of shortcodes out into the page content. So if you ever tried to turn it off, what was like a normal looking homepage is now just a bunch of raw shortcodes. And so as a consequence, if you were to change themes and lose some of the custom Visual Composer modules that your giant bloated theme forest theme registers, you would be in a similar position. You would just like all of that cannot live without your theme. And that could be like the entirety of your that could be the entirety of your products page, for example. So the other reason that like commercial themes, like basically commercial themes are never like theme forest commercial themes, especially ones that promise that they're all in one, especially ones that say that they're for people with no technical knowledge, especially ones that bundle with Visual Composer. Like they never respect whatever boundaries there should have been. Like they will have like an SEO function where you put in what you want your site's meta title to be, and they will have like an SEO custom sort of field on the back end where you put in, you know, every page's meta title and meta description, like replacing what a plugin like Yoast should do. They will, you know, they will have a place where you list what your social media accounts are, which is information you lose if you switch off the theme. They'll have a place where oh, I don't know. I mean, they might have like a user roles and permissions module where you define like custom user roles in a way that you lose when you switch off the theme. So the thing to do if you have a halfway understanding of what theme creep is and just kind of want to avoid it is do not buy theme forest themes that promise that they're everything in one, especially the ones that bundle with Visual Composer. That would be honestly my sort of first piece of general advice if you want to know what to do about this.
Cool. I don't think I've got a lot more to add. I think, you know, the thing that happened for a long time was that like custom post types would get registered by themes and people would be like having 18 custom post types because their theme was marketing that they included them. Fortunately, that's waned a lot. But that's really what stirred me to write that like 5 years ago. And there still is an article on the site about that we updated recently because it continues to be a evergreen topic in a way I never would have expected. I hoped people got religion on it quickly, and they haven't quite. So,
let me just say one sort of slightly kind of. I'm glad you said religion because to me this feels slightly heretical. It's you know, a lot of websites don't switch their theme very often. You know, like there's this sort of story where like, hey, you know, none of the data is implicated in the theme, so just switch themes out, just go crazy, do whatever you want, you know. But the reality is that when people come around to completely changing the visual look and feel of their site, they're often changing a lot else about their business. So there is another side of the story where it's a little bit less common than you might think, that people are like, I love my site, everything about it's going perfectly, but because I'm crazy, I've decided to spend $10,000 switching the theme. So what does that mean in practical terms? It means preserve the option. Don't have the theme loaded with things that it shouldn't include. And the bonus of that is that because you're being conscientious about the difference between themes and plugins, you're not buying the world's worst themes, and you're not basically like all good development practices kind of correlate. And the fact that you're being careful about this likely means that you won't run into other problems that kind of bundle with themes and developers who aren't careful about the theme plugin distinction. But you know, don't go crazy about this. Like it's relatively rare that a business wants to keep everything about its site the same and just switch the theme, which is basically what avoiding theme creep entirely lets you do. So there is a second side of the story. But in terms of best practices, I never load anything on the theme that isn't just that David's, you know, foundational article on theme creep advises against. So it's just don't be, you know, fanatical about it, but do take it seriously, and it'll make you a better developer if you're actually aware of that distinction.
Yeah, I think there is an argument in favor of pragmatism in some cases where I literally need to change this one piece of functionality, and it's way quicker if I do it here. And the client is happier because I spent 1 hour instead of 3. But I think the idea, as you said, is still sound. All right, so how do you make a plugin so you can change the settings for the plugin in the WordPress dashboard?
So, I mean, if I was going to try to do that right now, I would be basically Googling WPShout options page. And David wrote 2 outstanding articles on that topic. One that uses the settings API and one that doesn't. And I would be reading the one that doesn't. And I would also possibly be looking at Up and Running, which is the same content, but better with a limerick and a video. So that's my 2-second answer, David.
Yeah, I'll endorse all of that. The short answer is that WordPress provides a number of APIs or ways to do this, where you create a page that shows up in the admin area. You register it under like a specific one of the menus. So often you'll see that plugins have created their thing under settings or under tools. And a lot of plugins, especially nowadays, for reasons of visual importance for their marketing team or whatever, have like made themselves actually like at the same level as the WordPress settings option. But what you do is you tell WordPress, hey, I want to make a page that shows up in this sidebar somewhere. And then you just create the page that will save the option. And then you make your code interact with that option. As Fred said, like this is getting into the deeper parts of actual doing WordPress development than it is just like, oh yeah, just turn on this plugin and suddenly you've got it, because you have to like actually make that option that you've presented to your users in that screen show up when they go like use the short code or whatever it is. So there is like a 2-level dependency there where you need to understand what a WordPress option is and then how you can use the settings API to set it or not, and then also fetch it when you're going to like render a short code. So there's a lot of things that go into like actually just doing that. It's not as simple as like, well, just use Gravity Forms or anything like that. There isn't some option that just like makes that very simple. But I think, yeah, the basic thing is we've got a couple articles and there are plenty of other ones out there in the world that kind of do this vicinity of things. But, you know, the short answer is an options page, a settings page, and you will find, you know, 20 plus pretty good articles in the world about that. And we've written a couple of them.
Yeah, the best ones.
The best ones.
The best too. Okay, so we've got a question in the live chat about, do you have a resource for troubleshooting a website that is loading slowly? Maybe we can talk about that quickly. Yes, so Google PageSpeed Insights used to be good, and this kind of happens kind of often with Google, but it's like they give you progressively less information as time goes on. It's really weird. There are a lot of tools. The Pingdom speed test was very good. It's at tools.pingdom.com. And there was another one I tried whose name I can't remember. It was something like Quantic.
Yeah, well, I was going to say GT Metrics.
Oh yeah, that was actually it. GT
Metrics for some reason.
Yeah, GT Metrics. Yeah, that I
popular one.
Yeah. So if I was, please, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. Go ahead.
Well, so the one thing I was going to say is like there are 2 levels of troubleshooting this. One is what is slow, and any of these tools would answer that, and then there's what to do about it, which we don't currently have the exhaustive resource on. But I just want to make that distinction that when PageSpeed Insights or GT Metrics or something tells you what to do, you then have a series of smaller problems that you either need to understand better or just like act on, that they give you as a diagnosis of like, oh, my server is so slow, or oh, you know, I'm loading too many JavaScript files.
Yeah. So Josh is telling us specifically his Fusion sliders load slowly, and that to me means probably a bunch of unfortunate JavaScript. And it could be the case that your images are too big. You could, you know, the Fusion, I don't know the Fusion slider in detail, but it could be loading full-size versions of every image in the slider. And if that full size is 4,000 by 3,000 pixels, that's going to make everything really slow. So I chatted you our contact information. Just hit us up and we can look at that in more detail. But in general, as David said, well, there's actually kind of 3 pieces. There's one is what speed test should you use, and Pingdom and GT Metrics are very, very good. So use both. Then it's like, can I actually read and understand what this thing is telling me? And that's a journey, because, you know, if you don't know the difference, let's say between server side and client side, or if you don't have good rules of thumb in your mind for how big a website should be in terms of megabytes loaded, or if you don't know what a request is and you don't know that, you know, 50 requests is okay, 200 is really bad, like those are things you need to learn just with repetition and ideally with somebody helping you kind of read. It's really important to be able to read sort of the waterfalls and see where the big things where something is happening, something that's blocking all other things is happening. So learning to read those things is an art in itself. And I agree with David that we haven't covered that as extensively as we'd like. But yeah, Josh, in your particular case, yeah, be in touch and we can try to help you troubleshoot the specific problems you're having. But in terms of overall tools, GT Metrics and Pingdom are very good. Google PageSpeed Insights, was my go-to and is now kind of weirdly not great. So I would recommend the first two names that I mentioned.
Yeah, I would say that PageSpeed Insights is still way better than nothing, but all of them have the big downside that you can be told to enable caching, and then you can go down the rabbit hole of 18 different explanations of caching and how to turn it on, and none of them actually make your site any faster because you don't understand the underlying thing.
Yeah, and because the real issue is that you're loading 40 10 megabyte images for some stupid homepage slider that you're persisting in having. So yeah, it's its own topic. It's like SEO. It's actually a very, very deep topic, and almost, and there's a massive problem knowing what advice to take seriously. So yeah.
Yeah. We should work on that.
Yeah. Okay, good. We have something to do instead of, celebrating Christmas or whatever.
In 2019, we should definitely put.
You'll know everything about page speed come June 2019 if we if we don't.
Follow through.
Yeah, if we follow through, fingers crossed. So I love the next question. Your top 5 plugins.
Go. Let's bounce back and forth.
Sure.
Gosh, I do not have like a feature set I always reach for. The first thing that came to mind for me was Yoast. I've hated Yoast at various times. It's a little marketing-y, and I kind of have like always had an aversion to SEO, but it's so useful to just like have it count for you how many times you use the keyword that you're trying to target, for example. And the free version is really pretty solid at like doing a bunch of SEO best practices for you out of the box. And then obviously it doesn't take care of the fact that you have to actually write the articles that will rank once you've gotten the site map and all those sorts of things. But Yoast is something that I basically put on every site because it's such a good like distillation of SEO best practices, and it's available for free.
I think my single favorite plugin is Beaver Builder because people have been making WordPress page builders for a very long time, and they've all been so bad that it's like, it's like people have been trying to make wings for human beings for a long time, but they, like everything else, were just like these sort of fractured things made out of glue and balsa wood. And it's like, no thanks, I'll walk. And Beaver Builder was kind of the first thing that I as a working WordPress developer can use, and it enhances the quality of my output without creating this sort of precarious quality cliff where the next thing you try to change or extend or add, it just all falls over. So it really radically transformed the way I approach WordPress development. I think it has been kind of the first sort of answer from the marketplace to something like Squarespace, which 2 or 3 years ago I felt like was untouchable for simpler sites, like sites on the simple end of what you would use WordPress for. For a lot of those sites, I'm actually back to using Beaver Builder because it's such a good drag and drop visual builder experience. So that's probably my number 1.
That's really interesting. This is a bit of a cheat, but the other plugin that I reliably install is, I think it's called SG Cache Press nowadays. Fred, you might actually know its name.
No, that's what it's called. It used to be called Super Cacher, but they've bulked it out, and now it's called SG Cache Press. Yeah,
so this is a SiteGround specific plugin. So if you have a site hosted anywhere else, you don't want or need this plugin, but I always I host every hobby project I have on SiteGround, with some exceptions that I'm too lazy to move, and I always install this plugin because basically what it lets me do is easily and quickly purge the cache of the site, and also do other things like modify PHP version and just like a bunch of things that are useful from a like server administration perspective are rolled into this plugin, so they're right there in my WordPress dashboard, and I really appreciate that a ton.
I just looked, and it's actually called SG Optimizer. But yeah, it's the sort of caching and other stuff plugin that comes with SiteGround if you install a WordPress site through SiteGround hosting. Okay, so number 2 for me, I think all-in-one WP migration. There's a plugin called Duplicator that apparently works at a similar level of quality that I've never really tried. But all-in-one WP migration basically takes what used to be one of the hardest parts of WordPress development, which is migrating WordPress sites, and it makes it like a kind of a 4-click process. So we've written about it on Shout. If you just Google WPShout all-in-one WP migration, or I say with Faint Traces of Pride, just all-in-one WP migration, you'll find our articles on it, and you'll see how it works. But basically, for I would say 80% of site migrations I've needed to do, it was as simple as like a 4-click process. They do this sort of freemium thing where they limit the size of site you can migrate with the free version, but the pro version is really, really, really worth the investment. So that's probably my second. Yeah.
I will stand up for a backup plugin. Specifically, I'm gonna do. I'm forgetting. I'm blanking on the name. Updraft Plus is like the best, in my experience, free backup plugin for WordPress. I personally use Backup Buddy a lot because I like that it's not shoving files into my Dropbox. But Updraft Plus is definitely a thing I would recommend you use. If your host is your only source of a backup of your WordPress site, you're in better shape than someone who doesn't have that, but that's about the strongest thing I would say about it. I wouldn't necessarily trust any host, including ones I love, to be the sole source of a backup. I'm a little paranoid about backup, especially when you consider the world population. But really, until I have a thing in 3 places, I don't trust that it's backed up. So that one's the best free one I've found. They do have as so many things in WordPress these days, a freemium model where if you need, I think, like a different schedule or something like that, you have to pay. But the free version works well enough for me in almost all cases. And so definitely back up your WordPress website other than with your host.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, so number 3 for me, what came to my mind is this plugin called Show Current Template. And there's at least 3 plugins that do something very, very similar. Show Current Template is just the one that's marginally better than the other 2. But what it does is on any page on the front end of your WordPress site, it will tell you the name of the template file that is generating the page. So like if you're in a single product on a WooCommerce site, it'll say, oh, this is being generated by WooCommerce.php or product single.php, something like that. And it just makes theme development and theme modification vastly, vastly easier, because without that, you're essentially kind of like staring at the template hierarchy and hoping you didn't miss anything. So it's a massive, massive time save.
And if you need to stare at the template hierarchy, go to wphierarchy.com, #marketing. But yeah, I love those things. I almost want to cheat and use that again right now. And I'm going to. So yeah, it's super useful. I mean, I know the template hierarchy relatively well among WordPress developers, but I still always reach for one of these 5 plugins. Show Current Template is probably one of the easier to remember names that they have.
Which template and which template file are 2 others.
Yeah, and they're all, as Fred said, they're all within a rounding error of each other. That I honestly have different ones running on different sites at different times. But it's so useful to like know without having to like look at the theme file and check my understanding of the template hierarchy that, oh, this is an author archive, but it's been customized into /Susan versus this is one that's just using index.php to like display this page right now.
Okay, so I think that was 4 for you. This will be my 4th, and I'm going to say Gravity Forms. It's just the best form plugin in WordPress by default. If you have a reason to prefer another one, that's cool, but I think Gravity Forms is the right default choice for almost any need, any kind of form need you would have. Obviously, the easiest thing that comes to mind is like a contact form on most sites. But there's all kinds of forms. I mean, there's registration forms. There's registration forms with like a PayPal integration to actually make payment. You can just use Gravity Forms with an extension and have like a fully functioning e-commerce site that's based on event registrations. And I've got a site that I'm running right now that's doing that for a client. So yeah, Gravity Forms is a premium product, but I believe it's a one-time payment. Or I don't know. I can't remember how they price, but whatever it is, it's worth it. It's really the best form plugin as a default choice. It's kind of the most stable. It's the most extended. It has the cleanest interface. And I will just sort of say this is not in my top 5, but if you insist on going free, I think Contact Form 7 is probably the best free choice that there is out there. But I pretty strongly prefer Gravity Forms. Yeah.
So I'm cheating because my brain was racked. I think I'm going to pick Akismet as like you need some kind of spam comment solution if you're going to have a comment form open on a WordPress website. And Akismet remains like a reliable way to filter those things out. But I know we've had the experience more than once of forgetting to install something like that. And people are like, my website got hacked. I'm getting all this spam from it. And it's really just people spamming the contact form and then the person being set up as the administrator of the email address of the site. And that happens all the time because WordPress websites have comment forms by default, and people aren't used to getting like ads for Rolexes or Jordans or whatever in them. So installing something like Kismet and just like having something that's reliably filtering out most of that comment spam so the owner of a site doesn't see it as super useful. I definitely don't love comments on the internet in general, but if there wasn't Akismet, I would never have comments on any website. And I like the comments on WPShout. I think we mostly get good comments. So
yeah, we've been lucky. Thank you guys. Okay, so I'm just going to name, so this is my fifth. Honorable mention is Easy Google Fonts, just because I want you guys to hear that that's a really good plugin. It's for anything you're trying to do with Google Fonts, just like use that plugin. And the way it works is kind of specific, so watch like a tutorial video or read its documentation of it, but it's really, really great plugin. But I think my actual fifth choice would be Simple 301 Redirects. There's a lot of redirection plugins out there that work similarly. There's a plugin called Redirection, and I don't actually think we're using Simple 301 Redirects on WPShout. I think we might be using Redirection or something else. But Simple 301 Redirects is my favorite, and it has like a bulk uploader kind of thing that lets you just paste in a CSV of 301 redirects, like this to this, this to this. You could paste in dozens or hundreds at a time, and it'll bulk upload those for you without you having to fill out its little form every time. The basic thing that Simple 301 Redirects does is it redirects old URLs to new ones. So if a piece of your content changes locations, or let's say you are moving on to WordPress for the first time, so all of your old links are at like about-us.asp or something like that, redirecting that just to /about-us, right? That's the kind of thing that Simple 301 Redirects does. And if you're not clear on why you would need that or what that's good for, you need to know that if you're building WordPress sites, because otherwise what you'll end up doing is destroying your client's presence in organic search. And depending on their business, you could cost them huge amounts of money. So, Google, like, I ruined my client's SEO, WPShout, and you'll kind of see a lot of pretty heartfelt content from me on why you need to understand the basics of SEO, including and especially the need to redirect old permalinks.
All right, we're getting to the top of the hour, and we have two more things that have 2 votes. So we'll do them real quick. First, Fred, what is your favorite American Thanksgiving food?
Mashed potatoes.
Fair. I think most people in the world would know what mashed potatoes are. Mine is a little more specific and might not make sense to everyone in the world. It is green bean casserole, which is green beans, which probably makes sense, mixed with Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, which is like this cream and mushroom flavored soup, and then fried onion rings, like these little crackery sort of things. If you know Funyuns, which probably aren't as any better well-known nationwide or worldwide, you kind of like mix in things that are thinner than Funyuns but similar in flavor, and it tastes delicious. But it's very specific. Like I have it about 3 times a year, which is like Thanksgiving, Christmas, and maybe Easter or something. But it's so good. All right, Black Friday deals. So our email just went out, actually, Fred. Sadly, we are bad at email automation. But what is our Black Friday deal?
Yeah, so the 2 courses that we've launched are both, people love them. Like, our readers really love them, and I'm telling you that, but it's also true. Up and Running is our course that basically teaches the fundamentals of WordPress development, basically the PHP backbone of WordPress. And it first launched in 2015, and we've revised and expanded it almost every year since, including earlier this year. People seriously love Up and Running. It's we're pretty confident when we say that it's the best way to learn WordPress development, literally in the world. And then WordPress security with confidence is basically the most definitive guide to WordPress security that exists in the world, and what security means in a WordPress context. And what's different about it relative to just like Googling a lot of stuff about security is that it will tell you what actually matters and what doesn't, what is just kind of like scare tactics and kind of people making a big deal out of nothing, what you need to pay attention to, what you don't, what will help, and also what kind of common security practices won't actually help, don't actually matter. It gets very, very in depth in terms of, terms that a lot of people kind of are sort of startled by, or like, it's like, well, geez, like acronyms like cross-site scripting. And so the point is, if you want to be sure that you are doing WordPress security right, that your client sites are secure, that your sites are secure, that you're paying attention to what matters and not paying attention to what doesn't, WordPress security with confidence is the best resource on the internet for that. And why don't I let you describe what the actual Black Friday through Cyber Monday deal is, David? And
Sure.
Yeah.
So our both of these courses, the like top tier version is regularly $197, but we're basically doing a buy one get one free deal on them. So if you already own Up and Running, you can get half off of Security with Confidence, and if you don't, you can just get them both for $197. So that'll run Friday to Monday, I think is what the email that went out said. For $197, you'll get, a 398. I'm bad at math. No, a $394 value. So it's definitely a good deal. And in addition to that, Fred is planning to round up the other Black Friday deals that we've got, and we'll tack that onto emails about our discount, and you'll be able to find it on the site as well. So other best Black Friday deals will be available on WPShout itself over the weekend, I believe.
Yeah, that's right, guys.
Cool.
Okay, thanks for tuning in. Great to shout at you quietly, and happy Thanksgiving to those of you guys who have Thanksgiving in your countries, cultures.
It's
and
basically only Americans.
Happy Thanksgiving to Americans, and have a great weekend, everybody else. Happy Black Friday, happy Cyber Monday.
All right.
Cool. Good to talk to you.
Bye.